I want to welcome everybody to joining right now for the webinar series. Excited. This is the first of 9 Tuesdays in May and June that we'll be doing the EC/PC Back to Black webinar series. So EC/PC, simply employees and customers post-corona. Why did we come up with that as a theme? Well, let me tell you a little bit of a story. And to do that, I have to take you all the way back to 1973. And this is a picture of Angus Young. Angus at the time was 18 years old. He and his brother Malcolm, who was 20, decided to start a band. And that band was called AC/DC. Now, just 1 year after starting it, they decided they needed a new lead singer. And they hooked up with Bon Scott, who joined the band in 1974 and would become the lead singer and the lyricist for the next 6 years. The following year, they came out with their first album, High Voltage. And over the next 5 years, they would produce another 5 albums. And as they were finishing out their tour for Highway to Hell, the Australian band happened to be in England. And Bon Scott was a notorious partier, and he went out for a big night in the pubs in London, and unfortunately drank so much that he blacked out and became unconscious. And one of his friends thought, well, we'll just put him in the back of a car to let him sleep it off. And unfortunately, when they checked on him the next morning, he had, during the night, had vomited. And because he was still unconscious, he aspirated and choked on his vomit and dying tragically at the age of 33. Now, what makes this a sad story is obviously this was crushing to the band. They went back to Australia. They held services for Bon. And the band just could not, this is 40 years ago in 1980, they couldn't find a way forward. And they thought of quitting and ending right there. But their friends and their relatives kind of pushed them on. They said, you have to press forward. That's what Bon would have wanted. And so they decided to move forward, and they ended up auditioning and hiring within a month after Bon's tragic passing, an Englishman by the name of Brian Johnson. And he would come on and become the lead singer of the band. Now, just 1 week after Brian accepted to be the new lead singer and lyricist, he was handed a plane ticket on April 1st, and it was to fly to the Bahamas and record the next album from AC/DC. Now, Bon had been the lead lyricist for the band and had written a bunch of stuff for the album, but out of respect for Bon, they decided that they weren't going to use any of the content that he had written. And so over the next 7 weeks, in very difficult conditions with a new lead singer, the band came together and launched at the end of those 7 weeks what we all know today as one of the most famous albums of all time, Back in Black. And it's later that year in 1980, in July of 1980, it launched, and it became an overnight success. In fact, it is the second best-selling album of all time. And it's a metaphor for this series. I like, as we think about how AC/DC overcame adversity, found a new way to work, and were able to produce maybe one of the best albums of all time. And so today is the first of 9 Tuesdays in May and June. Today's pretty special, though, because today we're going to launch the Silver Goldfish, which is the 10th color in the Goldfish series. It focuses on the idea of being loud and clear, and the 10 keys of creating memorable presentations. Now, a little bit of background on myself. All the way back in 2012, my first book came out. It was called The Purple Goldfish. And in 2012, I ended up moving my family to North Carolina from Connecticut. And I live in a town called Cary, North Carolina. And I began the journey of becoming an author, full-time author, and a speaker. And I'll never forget it. I'm kind of learning the craft. And at the end of 2012, I saw a listing for an event that was broadcasted. And it was called Championship Speaking. It was an event by the AMA chapter here in the Triangle. And a guy by the name of Alan Hoffler was due to speak. Now, I'll never forget it. 2 days before I was so excited to go to this event, I contracted the flu. When the day came, the spirit was willing, but the body was weak. But from that point, I connected with Alan, and it's been a nice back and forth now over almost 7+ years. And last year, we decided to team up and go down the road of creating a book to help not only share what we've learned, but to help others in the process. So with that, I'm going to share my screen and turn it over to Alan so he can walk you through a little bit of the background of what problem we're solving here.
Just shortly before I got that call from Stan, I had walked away from a career in corporate, setting out on my own to start my own business, coaching others in speaking and teaching what I had been privileged enough to pick up over some years of practice and study. And just shortly before that, I had been out at a client for the first time. I had met with one of the vice presidents and his leaders. We had gone through a workshop together. They were a willing group and had really done a nice job. We got done. He says, "Hey, why don't you come down to my office? Let's just get to know each other a little bit." And we did a little podcast together then. One of the questions he asked me has really revolutionized my thoughts, and I'm still searching for a good answer to his question. He said, "Why is it, as a leader, if I have an employee who has bad performance, if they're late to work, if they had body odor, if they just can't get the job done, and I've got all these interventions that I can step in and do." He said, "But if somebody gets up in front of my staff or gets up in front of our clients and they give a bad presentation, we don't say a word. We pat them on the back, say nice job, and everybody behind the back's going, whew, that was terrible. But nobody confronts somebody about a bad presentation." And my first thought was, well, that's on you as a leader. You gotta man up. You gotta step up and make the comment. But what I found is that's replicated over and over and over again, is that millions of times a day, people get up to speak and do bad things on stage and nobody says anything about it. And the reason is, I think, is because speaking is inherently personal. It's me on stage. I mean, Stan and I are here today. If we do a bad job, it's on us. And the fear comes in. It's legit. I still get nervous. My heart rate was elevated before we went on this call. Last year, I found out that that's coming from the same place as excitement, which means it's important to us. But more people seem to be afraid of, in terms of the number of people who identify fear with speaking than even of dying. And Jerry Seinfeld has made a living off this joke of saying that most people would rather be in the casket than giving the eulogy. Stan and I have done extensive research, and we can't find any examples of people that are diving in front of buses before they give the quarterly reviews. But the nerves are real. And it's true of most of us. And because of that, frequently it makes our performance not what we think it would be. Mark Twain said it this way. He said, "There's two types of speakers in the world, only two types. There's the nervous and there's the liars." He had a way of putting those words together, is that ultimately most of us, and I've met a few people that claim they're not, but most people would say, "Hey, I'm nervous when I speak." But we still get up and speak. Many times we don't know if we've done a good job or not, but most people seem to want to just get through it. And here's the comments you hear: "Oh man, I just can't wait till this day is over. I'll be glad when that interview's done. I'll be glad when my presentation is through. I've been gearing up for that big deal, and I'll be so glad when it's over." So we have this myth that we've uncovered, is that by me getting up and sharing what I want to share, that somehow communication has taken place. That at the end of this 30 minutes that we do, plus your Q&A at the end of this call today, of this webinar, will have communicated with you. But that's an illusion. Communication is not defined by our completion of the event. And George Bernard Shaw is quoted with this, attributed this quote, that the biggest illusion is that we actually communicated. I've got 2 teenagers in the house, and we have miscommunications all the time. Of, you didn't tell me that. I think that teenagers have an inherent gene problem with listening, because I'll say, oh, I did say that. But the truth is, if they didn't hear it, if they didn't ingest it and take it to heart, then I didn't communicate, plain and simple. And therefore, the burden of the communication is on the presenter. What we've discovered is that nobody's born being a presenter. In fact, none of you on this call was born even speaking, much less presenting. And even in kindergarten these days, they're teaching kids to fire up PowerPoint and try to get up and speak, but it seems that their focus is just get up and do it. And sadly, we don't focus on the skills it takes. When I started my journey, I started asking anybody that would talk to me, hey, how'd you get to be a speaker? Tell me the secrets. Tell me what your one big tip is. And everybody said the same thing. They said, well, I had a mentor. I had somebody that taught me what to do. And here's the time in my life where I became a good presenter. And they would talk about the practice that it took. And they wouldn't give me any tips. It sounded like work. I was hoping they would just give me this pill I could take and I'd suddenly become this great speaker. And we call that a silver bullet. The definition there is a seemingly simple, magical solution. I just want the magic, man. Just make it happen. But that's not the way it works. And what we've discovered and articulated in Silver Goldfish is that it's really not that complex. It's fairly simple things, but they're skills that take work. They're efforts that you have to put in. So that's what really spawned the Silver Goldfish of these are just tips and things that you can do to become better, because it's a skill. But it's certainly, why do we name it great communication skills or great presenters do this? So Stan, why silver and why goldfish? What's that about? It doesn't seem to be talking about presentations.
So why, it's a great question. So why silver goldfish? And we'll start with the goldfish piece. As I mentioned on the outset, silver is the 10th color in the goldfish series of books. So why a goldfish? So the goldfish is a little bit about me specifically. My very first pet that I had, my very own first pet, was a goldfish. This is me when I was 6 years old. I always say, with
Nice.
a lot more hair than I'm blessed with having right now. But I'll never forget it. When I was 6 years old, I went to a carnival and a fair. Right? And I threw that ping pong ball, and for the win, I came home. I was so proud with my very own first goldfish. Now, it turns out that goldfish on average only get to be so big. In fact, if everybody can look at their thumb right now, the average person's thumb is 3 inches, and that's what an average goldfish grows to be. Some grow to be smaller, some grow, as we'll see here in a second, to be a lot bigger, but average is roughly 3 inches. Now, if you had to guess what the world's largest goldfish is, not a carp or not a koi, but the world's largest goldfish, how big would the world's largest goldfish be? Well, you're looking at it right here. It's nearly 20 inches or 50 centimeters, right? Which is 5 to 6 times the average size of the average goldfish. And put that in perspective, the average domesticated house cat is about 20 inches. So it would be like walking out of your home or your apartment this morning and bumping into somebody who's nearly 3 stories tall. And how is that essentially even possible that could happen? And I'm not going to get into the 5 reasons, but just to cut to the punchline, goldfish essentially grow in 5 different ways, and those same 5 things apply to each and every person that's on this call, and each and every business that's out there. And the punchline is this, that genetic makeup, how that you're different from other people, is literally the biggest factor that you have in terms of standing out in what we would call a sea of sameness. And so the ability to be able to speak and present, we talk about as a skill that is a differentiator out there. And if you don't believe me, this is a great quote by Buffett. He says, whether you like it or not, you should get comfortable with speaking. He says it's an asset that will last you 50 or 60 years. He says it's a necessary skill. So the goldfish in the silver goldfish is merely the idea of growth via differentiation, and how being an effective presenter is going to help you going forth in your career. Now, why silver in the silver goldfish? And this is going to sound personal. It sounds like I'm hogging the reasons here, Alan, but the silver is also personal to me because this is a picture of my dad, John Phelps Sr. And at the age of 17, his mom signed him into the service. After finishing basic training, he joined what was called the U.S. Signal Corps. And this is his card from attending the school at Fort Monmouth in New Jersey, which is down the Jersey Shore in Ocean County. And he became a radio repairman and then got stationed in Hawaii at Hickam Airfield. Now, his job as a radio repairman, and why the silver is key here, is as a radio repairman, many times their job was to be able to measure the strength of a radio signal that was coming in. And it turns out when you measure the strength of a signal, it's done based on two factors. And the first factor is strength or volume. And the second factor, and you can see that on the vertical axis, is clarity, right? And it turns out the scale that they would use as they would go back and forth was based on a 1 to 5 rating for both of these measures, with 5 being the best and 1 being the lowest or the worst. Now, if they would do a radio transmission and reach out and say, how am I coming through? If the recipient was hearing you perfectly, they would simply respond, you're coming through 5 by 5. And that was shorthand for loud and clear. And we love this as a metaphor, and I'm going to ask Alan to jump in here in a second, that our goal as presenters is really about just those two factors. And what we've done is look at the 5 elements of being loud and the 5 elements of being clear. I'll throw it to you, Alan.
Loud has to do with not the volume, because we got microphones. We can turn up the volume, and you can turn us up with your speakers there on this call. It's not about necessarily the volume of our voice, but the fact that I need to be louder than whatever distraction you're facing right now. And we know that on the web, you've got your email over here, and you got a web browser over there, you got a text messages flying in, and it's real easy to just tune out that voice. Yeah, we need to be loud enough volume-wise to be heard, but really we need to be more interesting and louder than the distractions in your life. This is true live as well. You go to a conference and you see people with their heads down. I've been fortunate enough to be at the back of some of those rooms, and you look at their computer screens and they're not taking notes. They're not logging into other information for the talk. They're doing other work because the person on stage is not loud enough. And the other one, the clarity of a message is, what did you hear me say? And this has become one of my favorite things in coaching. I was on a call with the Philippines this morning coaching a group, and one of the things we focused on was, how can we be clearer? And they were using lots of just sort of generic words. I said, no, specifically, what are you trying to say? And just as soon as they came up with specifics, suddenly the message came into focus. And many times we tend to muddle with euphemisms and acronyms and jargon that only our group understands. We need to figure out how to be loud, above the distractions, and clear so that it's absolutely no doubt about what we're trying to say. And there's our 5x5. You may make some note that today it's 5-5. That's not an accident. And those 5 tips that we came up with were we got to impress. When you get on stage, the first words we see all the time, people spend 20 minutes just coming up with introductions. You notice the Stan and I today, we didn't start by, hey, I'm Stan, I'm Alan, let's tell you a little bit about ourselves. You could figure all that out on LinkedIn if you really needed to know. So get to it, or to connect, to make sure that there's some human relationship, to express, to sound excited about what we're talking about, and to facilitate, to manage the system of what's going on. If we're unable to make this webinar go, hey, give us a minute, we got to fiddle with this, you're not impressed and you're distracted. And entertain, when I deal with technical people, they get nervous right now. Oh, entertain, I don't do funny, Alan. By the way, side note, if somebody tells you they're not funny, they're not lying. It's true. But we want to entertain in the truest sense of the word, which means to capture the mind of. If I can capture your mind, you'll not only listen to this call, you'll go out this afternoon and watch videos, read a book. Hey, there's a free book, I think, today you could probably find. You'll do something because your mind is captured. On the clear side, we talked about objectives and to simplify your message, to outline it, to make sure there's a structure to it, to visualize it, to put some sort of visual element to it, whether that be slides or props or even just drawing a whiteboard. And then one thing that we stick to over and over again is that you're going to finish on time. This is the Western culture. We're going to finish on time. It's the biggest gift we can give somebody. So
hey,
today
Alan, so I know the book is great because it's got 64 tips within these 10 keys. But why don't you take them through maybe 1 or 2 tips that we like to share from both loud and clear?
Yeah, it's tough to try to just pick one because, of course, we'd be leaving something out. But I guess first and foremost, my favorite, and you're asking me to do it, so I'll just give you my favorite, is the connection, the stories. And this, I spent most of my career in high tech and math and numbers and computers, and there's some really smart people in that world. And they give lots of facts. And one of the things we try to do is to get them to tell stories, because stories are much more memorable. And people can walk out and repeat stories. Matter of fact, I think if we polled the group today and said, hey, tell me a little bit about AC/DC's history, you'd be able to repeat it. And if I asked you to repeat the 10 elements of the book that I just gave you, I doubt you could give me 3. Stan spoke 30 minutes ago or 20, whatever it is, and I spoke 30 seconds ago, and you can remember more of his story than you can of my list. So that should be an example of why we want to tell their stories. And that's something you can get better at. It's not just telling it, it's telling it in the right amount of time, because stories eat up details. And we give you some structure on how to do that and ways to practice stories to fit the amount of time. And too often people tell stories just about themselves, but stories need to have your audience in mind. You need to understand that the story is carrying a message to them. And we use the acronym WIFI, what's in it for you? Because ultimately it's not about my story or Stan's dad or anything else. It's really, how does this fit you? How does it work in with you? And be the guide on the side, not the sage on the stage. So that would probably be my favorite in the
So then I'm going to challenge you then to talk about my favorite. And I learned this from Alan. Alan does a great 2-day workshop. And so back in 2014, I did the 2-day intensive. And I learned, I'm a big acronym guy. If you don't know me, I love acronyms. And so this acronym is called STOP. STOP. And this is in tribute to, well, today's May the 5th, but yesterday was May the 4th be with you. Alan, and I'm going to say really quickly, this is the best, I think the best thing I learned from you, and they're going to learn it in a second. But I love it because it doesn't tell us what not to do. It focuses on purposeful behavior that makes us better as presenters. So explain what STOP is.
Yeah, STOP is a way that we can get our message out in a way that's easier to understand. And it goes along with expression, which involves our inflection and our facial expressions and our gestures and all that stuff. But ultimately, we've got to get thoughts to your mind. The best way to do that is to honor the period at the end. That's called a stop in the signal corps, or if you're sending a telegram, it's a stop, it's an end. But the acronym stands for single thought. Thoughts are separated by punctuation. Come to a point in the sentence, comma, finish it. When we get to one of those punctuation marks, the single thought, ST, we want to deliver that to one person, OP. A little bit different on the web because my one person is right there. I look at one camera and I see all of you on the call. But in a live audience, what this does is it forces you to come to the end of a statement that we never want to speak unless we're looking at someone. It forces us to create some space between our sentences. I'll finish a sentence here, stop. I look here and deliver the next sentence. It eliminates a lot of that clutter. It creates a space for me to think. People think pauses are long, but boy, if you just give yourself a little bit of chance to think, many of the greatest pains in my life would have been solved by simply thinking before I spoke. And when we get on a roll, it's really hard to keep up for the audience. Stop is a great way to make sure that the audience is going to get those little nuggets and be able to follow through. STOP, single thought, one person, easy tip.
And Alan, one of the things I love about it, what it forces you to do is it eliminates all of those filler words. Yeah. And Alan's favorite quip to me is, no so for you. No so for you from Seinfeld. Yeah. So was one of my words when I took the workshop. But what's great for the audience, it also allows them the ability to take in what you just said and reflect and apply it to their life. And as a speaker, again, Mark Twain, there's no such thing as somebody who's not nervous. If you can start your presentation by adding those little punctuation points in there, it allows you to breathe. And breathing, believe it or not, allows you to get oxygen to your brain, and it makes you a lot more relaxed and a better presenter. Yeah, so I love it. I love it. Challenge them. And I remember you giving me this challenge. What was the challenge you gave me as we left that class?
I don't remember. It's been 8 years, 6 years.
So then I'll tell you. So the challenge that Alan gave me was, look, everyone likes to listen to sports radio or talk radio or news. Pay attention the next time you're in the car and you see an on-air personality interviewing and speaking with an athlete or, someone from the public. Maybe not a politician. They tend to be better. But you'll notice the difference, how they both communicate. And the on-air personality is going to be fantastic with this idea of stop. And that athlete or that person from the general public is going to stumble. They're going to have those filler words. They're going to run on. And so it's a dynamic to see the difference.
You could have prompted me a little bit ahead of time on that question.
Yeah, great. Let's jump into clear here.
Yeah, this is where Stan is shined unlike anybody else. Is one of the questions I ask anybody that we're working through their messages. Tell me what you want to say in one sentence. Simplify it down to just one sentence. Stan is the only person I've ever asked that actually had a sentence. Everybody else goes on for a paragraph or 10 minutes sometimes. I did that one time with a group and it took 4 hours for them to do that for their slide deck. They had no idea what they were talking about. But getting it down to one sentence gives you a simplification and a clarity of what you're trying to say, what you're trying to communicate. We get our inspiration from this, from the great inspiration of Curly from City Slickers. And Curly's taken a midlife crisis Mitch across a cattle drive in the Midwest. And Mitch has obviously got problems, and Curly figures it out. And he asks him this question. He goes, we don't know what secret to life is. And Mitch goes, no, why? Yeah, what is it? And he holds up his finger, that picture that Stan's got up there, and goes, this. And Mitch goes, your finger? Billy Crystal, you can imagine, very funny. And Curly goes, one thing, just one thing. Mitch goes, that's great, but what's the one thing? That's what you got to figure out. That's what I have to say to everybody is you got to figure out what you're trying to say. Simplify it. And we tend to want to add our expertise. I'm the expert. I got the PhD. I'm the person that's done the research. But what is it you're trying to say? The other question that goes along with this, I ask people, is how long does it take you to figure out, to know what you know? And people will tell me, 15 years, 20 years. My PhD took me 6 years. then what are you going to do in 45 minutes? You're not going to teach them everything you know. So let's figure out the one thing you want them to know. Stan, what's your one thing?
Little things can make the biggest difference.
Very clear. And you've written just a bookshelf full of books centered around that one theme, is that differentiation is this little things. And that's really what we've got. Those 64 tips are all little things. I don't think any of them are going to surprise you or knock you off your feet, but you put them all together and those little things add up to make a big difference. What's your favorite number?
Three is the magic number. It's not only my favorite number, not just because I spent almost a decade working for Adidas, the three stripes, but why is three the magic number, Alan?
Well, they do research on the brain and how we memorize, and found out you can remember three things even better than you can remember two or even one. That it's much easier to remember three. It just kind of rolls off your tongue, and we have tons of examples. And Stan is constantly trying to throw three things at us, and we do that a lot. It's just easier to remember, both for the speaker when I'm trying to list you three things, and also more importantly for the listener.
Right. People remember things in threes. And to your previous point, if you're at 45 minutes, don't give somebody 10 things. One of the mistakes that we see a lot of speakers do is that they'll try to do the list of 10 things, and they'll get to 15 minutes left, and they still have 7 things left to cover in 5 to 10 minutes. And that's not fair to your audience. And we very specifically tried to keep our own medicine of just sharing a couple of things, not all 10 keys, because that wouldn't have been helpful.
Yeah, we'll be doing questions in just a minute. I noticed that Whitney just chimed in, and she's a big City Slickers fan. It is a fantastic movie. Unless you're going through a midlife crisis, then it's just depressing. So if you have questions, it'll be a great time to shout out. We'll be getting to those in just a second. Stan, give us oh, wow, you've got 3 things listed there. What a coincidence.
So really quick, in all of the Goldfish books, and again, great point that we're about 3 minutes away from going into Q&A, and we want to open it up to anyone's questions about communication and presenting. But all of the books in the Goldfish series are essentially broken into 3 parts. And we've done the first 2 parts here. The first part of the book is always the why. Why is this important? In this case, why silver and why a goldfish? The second part of the book is always based on this idea of looking through hundreds of examples. So we mentioned 64 tips, but in our project, we have over 250 examples that we researched. We just boiled it down to the top 64. But the third part of the book is more of the how. So if we did the why and then the what, the third part is the how. So how do you actually put this into practice? We want to give you an approach that can make you better. It's not enough just to know. It's important to know what to do when. So the silver approach, again, I love acronyms. The first 3 deal with the clarity. How do you organize your message in a way that it's going to come right through? You're going to communicate that central message. So the S in silver is this idea of starting. And we're going to make this tool available to you, but we've got this grid of 18 boxes I'm going to take you through pretty quickly. But the first thing that you do is that you start. And it's just in the top part of the grid, what's the topic and objective? Are you giving the audience a reason to listen? And then what's the one thing that you want to drive home? And for us today, it's this concept of being loud and clear. Now that's kind of your prep work. The I is illustrating. So if you created a good structure in the S, the I is how do you bring it to life? What props do you need? Are you going to use things like slides? How do you really nail how you're going to open and how you're going to close? And then once you've done that, you've got everything you need to get you to the L. And the L is this idea of learning. So spending the time to actually learn your presentation, so you're really you're very good when you in terms of presenting it to the audience. And I'm going to share a quick example of this because we talk about notes and outline. This is kind of like almost a band set list. I always put one of these together before I do any talk, and always have it in my pocket or nearby. You want to schedule time to practice. You want to focus on your opening and your closing. And lastly, rehearsals are the ability to do it from front to back multiple times.
Stan, what do you do with your set list when the power goes out?
When the power goes out, now this has happened to me before when I've had slides, and I simply just pull it out and I can find exactly where I was in the talk and then place it down. As we talk about, it's not a problem to have notes, you just don't want to rely on them. So if the SIL is all of your preparation work, the V, the E, and the R are all about your delivery. So it's vaulting, educating, and requesting. And so in terms of the vaulting, you want to get off to a great start. How are you going to introduce? Who's introducing you? You want to figure that out. How are they teeing you up for success? How do you need to dress for the occasion? And instead of rehashing your bio, how are you going to grab the audience? What's your first 6 words in your opening? And then the educating part is really fleshing out those 3 key points. And then lastly, requesting is how do you close? And how do you really bring everything together, tie it together? How do you handle questions and Q&A, or we call it Q and C? Nod to Stephanie Scotty. And then lastly, what are you asking the audience to do? And so again, we're going to make this tool available to you at the end of the presentation. And with that, I'm going to ask Sal to help us in terms of moderation. But let's plan on opening it up to Q&A. Feel free to be able to type that into the Q&A box. Sal, what do we have first? Do we have any?
I got one for you, Stan, and I didn't prompt him on this, so this is cold. You're a certified speaking professional, which means you've been on stage a bunch, really, is what that boils down to. You've been to the NSA, National Speakers Association conference. You've seen thousands of speakers because you shared the stage with them. You don't have to give me a name, but tell me something you've seen on stage that has affected your mindset or approach, or something you went, well, that was amazing, that you've seen in all your experience of being on stage.
Whew, that's a really good question. I like a guy, his name is Mike Robertson. He comes from, I believe, the Austin, Texas area. And Mike is a very good speaker. What I love that he's good, but he uses his slides in a way that makes him much better than he actually is. So the slide helps deliver the punchline of a joke. It helps reveal the information in a really dramatic and cool way. So he's somebody who stands out to me, who really is not only good just presenting wise, but uses all the tools in his arsenal to be able to communicate his message.
Stan is modeling for us something we teach you in the book, is what do you do when something goes wrong? His lights just went out in his office, but he's modeling, that is not planned. He's got to get the sensor on. There's good. But he didn't miss a beat. We teach you how to do that in the book. We sure do, in the facilitation chapter.
Right. Now let me ask you, because you've taught thousands of people, and I know we've talked about this before. What's the biggest request that you get at Millswick Communications?
Well, they hate the answer when they hear it, but by far the biggest request we get, I mean, the phone rings almost every day with this, is, can you make me a confident speaker? that's what people want. They want to feel better about their speaking. That goes back to what we talked about at the onset of that fear that they want to know, how can I be more confident on stage? Because I'm a mess. And the reality is I can't give anybody confidence, because confidence is internal. It's a feeling, it's a belief system, and you believe in yourself. And the best example I've had of this is my own kids. We just taught a couple teen drivers how to drive. And when they started out, they were bad. I mean, they were a danger to everyone on the roads pretty much. And they were scared to death of it. They don't want to drive. My daughter in particular is like, Dad, I'll just take Uber. I don't need to drive. But now, a few years in, Dad, I'm taking the car across town, rush hour, no big deal. I'll be fine. And the difference is her competence. That confidence follows competence. So what I offer people is, I can't promise you you'll feel better, but I can promise you will be better. Is that acceptable? And I've never had anybody go, well, no, I really just want to feel better. I don't care if I am better. I just want to feel good. That the confidence, I think, will follow. You get better at your confidence level, but you have to be good at it first. If you're confident in something you're bad at, that's called false confidence, and it really is not a good situation. But by far, the number one request we get is about confidence.
Great. So I had one that just came in. What is typically the easiest and the hardest thing for people to implement when it comes to improving their presentation skills?
Just from what we see in our workshops, the easiest is what we already covered, is that stop skill. That we'll have people come through and on average, when they come in, we have them give a little 90-second introduction, unprompted, no script, just show up and speak. And usually people have about 18 non-words, ums and ahs, so's and ands, just fluff, filler, says nothing. On average, we've seen thousands of people do this, about 18 in 90 seconds. We can get rid of that in minutes just by using stop. Just by getting them to come to the end of a sentence, stop, deliver their next sentence. Shocking. It's just magical to watch. That's fun because you get to see, and we do that up front, you see all this massive improvement in people looking more confident. But then
right.
the next thing we have to focus on, which is the hardest, part two of that question, is by far the movement and tones of voices, is the expressing. We talked about that. Is that people will look at you and they'll go, I'm excited to talk about this. You go, oh, wow. Are you really?
Right.
We'll push and poke and prod and get them to do gestures, and inevitably, I hate this. This feels terrible. I don't want to do it. I'm speaking too loud. I'm shouting. Getting people to express beyond what they feel is almost impossible without our good friend, who we invite to every class.
Tell them who Mr. Cannon is.
Mr. Cannon is my best friend. He's got friends, Mr. Nikon, Mr. iPhone, Mr. Samsung. I'm using Mr. Logitech right now. It's the video camera. He don't lie. He tells the truth. You can argue with me, but you can't argue with Mr. Cannon. And everybody that really wants to be great at communicating just has to fall in love with evaluation. And even your phone, you can use your phones and just do a voice recording. You don't necessarily have to have the video channel, but just listening to yourself. I still record myself a minimum of once a week and listen to it, just to polish my skills, to see. And I still hear things, oh man, I can't believe I'm still doing that. But it forces me to go back to the drawing board to practice and rehearse some more. But easy to get people to stop the filler words, really hard to get them to express beyond what their brain's telling them to do.
Yeah. I think there's such a discounting effect from how we feel when we present, and more importantly, how others perceive us. Mm-hmm. So sometimes we feel, hey, our gestures and our tone is coming across at, like, on a scale of 1 to 10, we're definitely coming across as like an 8 or a 9. And I've done this. I've asked people, what do you think I was coming across at? And they're like, 5, 6, maybe. And so you want to go full swan, right? You want to get bigger than you feel actually you're projecting, because people can't sense how we feel. They can only sense what
they see in the behavior that you express. That's all I got from you.
Right.
I'm looking through.
And so I think it's important to turn up the volume. We talk about going up to 11 in the book, right? Going 1 louder, but it's also important sometimes to turn it down.
Yeah. That's
going to make the highs higher.
Yeah, nobody's ever faulted me for my volume, loudness. I was a basketball coach, man. You're going to hear me, but the emphasis. If all I do is speak loud the entire time, then it just becomes droning on, and I hurt people's ears. Now, I'm looking at this list of folks on our call here, and I don't know, but maybe 10% of them by name. Maybe if I saw you, I'd recognize you, or you could remind me where we met. But you're getting an impression of me or of Stan maybe for the first time, and all you have to go on is what you see on the screen. It doesn't matter how I feel. And we talk about in the book with the idea of a persona, that I've got to put myself into a character, not to be somebody I'm not, but to be somebody you need me to be. And when we can get to that point, and actors and actresses do this all the time, it's interesting when you go and dig into most of these actors and actresses' life, the vast majority of them are introverts. That they've just are been out of shape about performing. I mean, Barbara Streisand used to throw up before she went on stage. That's how nervous she got.
Right.
But she had to convince herself that I've got 10,000 people out there waiting to see what I've got. And I've got to become this person that she didn't feel like she was, because that feels fake. And nobody wants to be a fake. That's hard to overcome.
Alan, I got a question from Whitney. She says, how do you build those stories or presentations for groups that you don't necessarily know? You don't know how they're going to react to your stories. What do you do? Yeah. I can tell you what I do, but you go first.
Yeah, there's two things that come out. One of them we talk a lot in the book, and that's research, is that when you say you don't know, you can probably dig around and stalk them on the internet, or I know you do this, Stan, when you go to speak, is just you schedule that 30-minute call with the leader or somebody that's represented, or even demand, give me an audience member that I can pick their brain. And boy, it's just gold when you get those details. But I think you also can just sort of stereotype, and I know we're not supposed to do that, but for instance, if you're talking, I talked one time to the airport association. I asked the guy that hired me, I said, well, who am I talking to? He goes, look in the mirror. It's a bunch of upper middle-aged white guys. And I was like, okay, here we go. It's people like you. So I go, okay, what would I be concerned about? And so I look at that and go, well, what is that? And I thought, well, parenting stories, middle-agers go through parenting, and most middle-agers have money problems, and they're trying to figure out how to get a little bit more because college is coming up, and most middle-agers got time problems. And when you throw those on this table, those stories resonate.
It's going to resonate, yeah. So for me, to your point, I will ask almost every event organizer. 3 is the magic number. I would say, give me 3 or 4 people on your team. And I say, give me your all-stars. The people that are influencers, people that are already doing a lot of the things that I'm going to be talking about. And I just spend 15 minutes with them. I don't even do the half hour. And that's enough for me sometimes to get 1 or 2 stories to be able to put into the talk, or to be able to call them out from the stage. And this is a selfish thing. What that also helps me to do when I walk into an association where I'm not really familiar with, now I have 3 or 4 people in the room, and I usually give them each a book and thank them for their time. But now I've got 3 or 4 champions in the room. When I walk up on stage, I at least know a few faces that I can connect with in the audience. And it usually makes the presentation that much better. And it shows that this is not just, canned out of the box, that you've actually taken the time to tailor it to the needs of the group. Got a question here from Shelley about stop, Alan. How do you use the stop approach in a meeting with people who jump in and interrupt the minute that you take a breath?
Yeah.
Can you set expectations to avoid this? Yes. I've got a good technique for this, but you go first, Alan.
This is a tough one. And it first was on my radar, I guess back, I think it was 2012, when we were watching the debates, the presidential debates, because anytime somebody stopped, you're giving up the stage to your competitor, and you don't want to do that. I think there's a couple of things you can do practically. One is to use visuals, like your hands, to kind of hold the air. The other is to tell them that you've got 3 things to say, three points. And then when they've only heard 1 or 2 of them, they know that you're not done. I have coached a few people to be almost rude, is to say, oh, I'm sorry, I wasn't finished yet. And that's tough though, because usually those are the people that they're soft spoken. You're asking them to be somebody that's really counter to their personality. I've been shocked when we went to one client, we're doing meeting training with them, and doing the research behind how many times we interrupt people. And it's based on gender, it's based upon seniority in the organization. I've been on a call with a client recently where the senior guy just cuts everybody off. And it's, I can't see the faces, but I'm imagining these people are just going, really, again? And he's losing a lot of respect, in my opinion, because he's just not going to be able to listen to his people. But you practically can hold the stage. The other thing I would say is make sure you put that core message up front on the case that you do get interrupted. Make sure that you're going to get that message out so the first words are real direct.
Don't bury the lead, right?
Yeah, exactly.
That idea from a newspaper perspective of burying the lead dates all the way back to the days of telegraph. And so when they were communicating the story back to the paper to be typed out, they never knew, especially in the days of the Civil War, when the telegraph could go down. And so they always wanted to have the most important stuff up front and not bury the lead of the story. And so I think a couple of things, Shelley, I think that's always going to be a difficult thing when you pause while you're in a meeting atmosphere. And I think that's why we develop those filler words. Mm-hmm. It's because, especially when we're on the phone and you can't tell from a physical gesturing that someone is finished, we use those filler words to say, hey, we're not done yet. So I'll double. Alan mentioned if you can do that. I've seen some people in virtual meetings, if they've got something in their hand, until they put their hand down, they have the quote unquote conch. If anyone remembers the days, what was that movie, The Conch? Someone help me in the comments. But yeah. When we're on stage, though, no one, and we're presenting generally, no one is interrupting us. So there's no reason why we can't at least use it in that environment. Question from Dennis. What are you two focusing on in terms of continuous improvement as a professional speaker? We can all improve. What are the most challenge areas you two face?
Yeah, I think it goes to another question we had in the chat, which is the sort of environment hereditary questions. The argument that we in speaking go through over and over again is it your content that matters, or is it your delivery? Is it my ability and my skill on stage, or is it my content that will carry the day? And the answer, of course, is obviously both. You got to have both. For me, I think I developed my skill first, and then went out and said, okay, well, what is it that I really want to say? And in retrospect, looking back as a professional speaker, especially on the speaking side, not the training side, you really have to have something to say, bottom line. In honing that and iterating that, I have a personal philosophy that I never want to give the same speech twice. Even though people pay me to come give that same speech, my signature speech, Winning Communication, I've given it hundreds of times. I never want to give it twice. I'm always trying to find a new nugget, something that'll be better or simpler, or how can I make it better? But ultimately, I got to have my delivery better as well. I think for my content side, what I'm always trying to do is to tell better stories, because I know they connect better. And on my delivery side, I've got to learn what we were just talking about, is that my loud, boisterous, confident sounding self, you have a little bit of insight into what's going on in my heart today. I've got to learn to bring it back. I've got to be more comfortable with those pauses. Boy, that one dies hard. Every time I listen to myself, I find that "and" creeping back in to connect those sentences. But my stories and my pace, I think, are the two things I constantly try to work on.
For me, I think the biggest challenge that I have is all of my books have a ton of material in them. And so I'm constantly trying to figure, how do I do this the best way that people get an overall sense and they have something that they can use when they leave the presentation? And I just wrote about it yesterday. The goal for us as we present is, one, for people to remember what the central idea was, right? Second, they have to be able to see it in a way that they can relate to. And then third, they have to have some type of plan or recipe for how they can apply it and move forward. And so for me, Dennis, as a professional speaker, is how do I organize my stuff in a way that I can achieve all three of those things? That it's rememberable, it's relatable, and it's actionable. And if I've done that, I feel like I've accomplished it. I mentioned this yesterday because a lot of times we get off the stage and people pat you on the back and they say, oh, you did a great job, or you were awesome, or that really related. I love this. One of my co-authors, Dave Rendell, will stop them and go, why? And it sounds bad at first. He's like, well, why was I great? What resonated with you? What are you going to do next? And I think unless we're willing to ask those questions, we're never going to know if we actually hit the mark. All right, we're coming down to the last 3 minutes. Yep, go ahead.
The answer to your question, and the two people in the chat, Alan and Greg, both chimed in. Lord of the Flies is your movie.
Yes. Yes, Piggy the Conch. Yes, thank you.
I have a question that you didn't resolve for me, and I know I should know this. You said that AC/DC had the second best-selling album of all time. You did not identify the #1 album of all time. Please answer that burning question for me and take us to the finish line.
Yeah, so let's see if anybody can get that in the comments. I'm going to share my screen again. So really quickly in the comments, I'm going to see if we hit the chat.
Alan is our trivia champion, apparently. Not
yes. So it sold 50 million. Thriller by Michael Jackson, which I think it's around 70 million or so. So Michael is still literally the king.
Shelly says she thinks you got old data, Stan, so we'll have to go Google it.
The first rule of marketing, Shelly. What's the first rule of marketing, Alan?
Don't let the facts get in the way of a good story.
Correct. So here's the thing. I want to finish up here. Thank you for sticking with us. Here's the thing. We've talked to you about Silver Goldfish, but here's the deal. We don't want you to buy the book, especially on 5x5 day. You know, some people, Alan, actually have the gall to call it Cinco de Mayo. But it's really 5. And the reason why we don't want you to buy the book is because, thank you to my Uncle Jeff, it is free today on Amazon. So you don't need a code in the chat. I think we're going to add a link to the book in the chat. But just go on. Believe it or not, it's the only book on Amazon that's called Silver Goldfish. And shocking. I mentioned that we've got some great resources. I'm really fond of the preparation grid. We also have a thing called the presentation matrix, which has 30 tips in it. So you get the right tips at the right time as you go through those 6 phases. And with that, I want to thank everyone for tuning in. Next week, next Tuesday at noon, we're going to be talking about the diamond goldfish, which is all about sales, client success, and how do you excel under pressure. So we'll look forward to seeing you next week. And any closing thoughts from you, Alan?
Thanks for coming, guys and gals.